So today's speak would be about what it's like to be product manager for identity. And really the main takeaway that I want you all to go home with is how we need to balance between security and user experience. Um, I'm sure you all are familiar with the triangle of being a good product manager, where you have the user, the business, and then the technology. And to be a good product manager, you have to know how to balance it. With identity, you have that another edge of security, and you get the diamond. But really, the main challenge is about how to balance between this user experience and security. And so before we go into those 10 principles that I believe that you need to adhere in order to be a good product manager for identity, let me quickly introduce myself. I work at Walmart Labs for identity with the mission to make it easier for customers to sign in. Does anyone here has like an idea why it is important to make it easier for customers to sign in, or in general, why do we need them to sign in?
We can get customer data, so we can analyze the usage to maintain or to manage our customer retention churn rate. And also on the other hand, we also need to make them easy to be onboarded or easy to sign in, so make just user experience easier for them.
So basically, to personalize it for them, to sign in.
Yeah, that's all of it is correct. There's also like the security aspect of it. If we know our users, we know their behavior, we know when it's suspicious or fraudulent activity. So all of this is helpful. Before Walmart Labs, I worked at Citibank for 4 years with similar mission, but different goals. Started working on two-factor authentication for institutional client groups. Those are the hedge funds, the corporate investment banking that are working with Citibank, and then moved to global consumer banking to solve the pain point of authentication in different digital channels, which was ATMs, mobile application, websites, and even the customer support. Usually friends and colleagues are asking me, what do you do 4 years as a product manager for identity? Isn't it all about just having this sign-in page with username and password? I mean, that's all about identity, isn't it? And really, identity is not anymore all about this sign-in page with username and password. When the internet started, more and more services started digitalizing and put this sign-in page. These days, you can find all of those third-party services that help you implement sign-in page. And you have a sign-in page everywhere. The average user has around 100 passwords to maintain, which leads to the problem that we don't remember them. And as human beings, what we're trying to do is survive. Survive is by having shortcuts. Yeah. The shortcut that we're doing, consciously or unconsciously, is reusing the same password among different websites, which becomes heaven for fraudsters. Because if you got the key to one password, you got the key to the kingdom. And so in 2016, when 500 million accounts were exposed in the darknet because of Yahoo data breach, that's where there was a lot of panic. And I worked at Citibank at that time, and I remember the panic that there was within Citibank on Yahoo data breach. Now you can ask yourself why. Simply because hundreds of bots started attacking Citibank's website to try to test accounts and see if the password matches to an account. Because when they hit one, they just do the transaction and they have they earn their salary for a month. And that's where we started implementing two-factor authentication, and other services started to put two-factor authentication as their offer. Which obviously added a lot of security and protected those that adopted it. but the adoption rate is very, very low because the experience is terrible. And it adds a lot of friction. I have two-factor authentication on almost every service I can. But like every time I curse myself for having it on a new device. And so obviously this has became really big problem for users and for a lot of websites. And luckily enough, almost every phone started having built-in biometrics, fingerprint or Face ID or whatever it is. I'm sure all of you have a smartphone and you have Touch ID or Face ID or fingerprint, whatever brand you have on your phone. And that's where we were moving towards what's called passwordless authentication, which is essentially just not having password as your way to authenticate. The good thing about this is that we didn't compromise not on security nor our user experience. And this is why it's so challenging these days to work on identity, because the expectation from the business and from the user is not to compromise on any of these domains. So now that you understand roughly like the area and what that we're not only talking about the sign-in page, let's talk about the 10 themes to adhere. So the first one is wearing the two hats, the fraudster and the user. And when I say wear the two hats, obviously when you wear the fraudster's hat, you have to think on how are you going to attack that feature that you are building. But then how are you going to protect, how are you going to build in your feature rules and ways to protect against that attack vector. And then there is the user, which is obviously something that you do as a PM, but wearing those two hats is really, really important. In 2016, what happened is that information security really pushed the business at CD to change the error message so that it wouldn't be indicative enough that an email address is associated with an account, or that when you try too many times to test with the wrong password that your account was locked. And the business, since there was a lot of pressure at that time, the business was willing to change the error message. We changed the error message to be something very vague, but we forgot the user. What happened is that 20%, we saw an increase of 20% in our calls. And eventually, we turned it off because the business realized that they are spending more money on hiring new representatives to answer their phone calls rather than dealing with the fraudsters. So really, that's a good example of how those error messages have to be balanced between the fraudsters or the security and the user experience. Theme number 2, plan to revise the flow. So when you plan to revise the flow, it's something that you do MVP, and you do then phase 2 and phase 3, and you have those priorities of what have to go in and what have to go out. But essentially, when you're dealing with identity, you may need to revise the flow during the A/B test or during the launch. An example for that was PayPal when they sent an email to ask customers to protect their account. And later on, this mindset was used to send a phishing email that something really bad happened with your account. And so what happened to the user, he got an email of, hey, PayPal is now collecting new additional information to help securing your account. You enroll to it. 2 weeks later, you get, hey, we noticed an unusual activity. And then you are not there to have that reasoning that, oh, now it's the fraudster that is knocking on my door. And so PayPal had to revise their emails and make sure that they have more indication on their emails and educate and add a lot more features into this original email where they were trying to collect information. So ironically enough, email campaigns to protect accounts are usually being used to do a phishing attack. So plan to revise is not only after your launch, but also in between. All right. Theme number 3, be the fraudster. So be the fraudster. There is no focus group to have fraudsters to ask them how they're going to attack your system. You don't meet them in the afternoon. And you have to learn how they attack the system. So I'm not saying you have to be a fraudster or you have to be an attacker in the dark net. But what you do have to do is you have to learn how they attack other systems. Just like you do a market analysis on how other companies are doing things, you have to do the market analysis on how they are being attacked. And then take that attack and try to apply to what you're working on and how is it going to, how can you duplicate this work on your own end. Theme number 4, UX does matter. So when I try to go to interviews that are not related to identity, I'm usually being asked, so do you work with a designer when you do identity projects? And so there is some surprise around like how many identity comprises UX. And almost every project I've worked on until now, it usually goes around 50 plus screens. Because what the user is seeing is usually like only one path in a branch of one branch in like a tree of so many options that you are seeing. And even the error messaging is very, very different, depends on what the use case and scenario you are seeing. And so example for how UX matters. Take a look into Facebook on the left side, where you are in recovery process. You forgot your password, text OTP is sent to your phone. You put the right OTP, you click continue, and then you go to this page, which is choose a new password. Now here you have 2 buttons. I'm not sure you see it well, but one is continue and one is skip. Does anyone here have an idea on what skip does?
Skip probably takes you to another form of authentication.
Maybe it keeps your old password and then just logs you in.
That's what it does. It takes you to the next to homepage. So essentially the feature here is designed for those that have a password manager in another computer and they don't want to change the password because they just logged in from a new device and they're not next to the device that has their password. So they don't want to change the password and they just want to sign in on this new device. So you see how confusing it is to put here the skip. But in terms of user experience, what do you think why is it problematic, this continue and skip thing?
Because it's ambiguous.
Yeah, no, I mean, the design. What is the problem with this design of having continue and skip here?
Yeah, it's defeating its own purpose. Like you want them to secure it, but they have the option to skip, and then they're not accomplishing what.
Yeah, so a quick hint is like take a look on the left and take a look on the right.
Makes it seem like the
It's a
continuous.
cancel.
Yeah, it looks like the cancel, and just people don't understand that. Like they just ignore it. Their eye doesn't go to that place even. Okay, theme number 5, inspired by Bake Off. That's really how an identity feature looks like when you try to go half-baked. It doesn't work. It looks like a raw egg. So in terms of security, you can't roll out a new authentication method on one operating system and just in iOS or just in Android. It doesn't work. The fraudster would not consult with you on what operating system is going to attack. And you also can't choose one version of the app or another. You have to be consistent along the app versions. In terms of the user, it's also a problem. If they started adopting a new authentication method and you roll it back, they actually lost their way to sign in. So this whole identity features cannot go without covering every single aspect. Theme number 6, and this is the metric slides. Product managers look on metrics all the time. Every A/B test is defined by its metrics, and specifically with identity, you mainly need to look into that in high level of, like, even if you work on just forget your password, you have to look on what it does for sign in or for sign up. And so take example on this. The sign up goes up and the business may be very happy about it. But if the sign in and the reset your password, if the success rate goes down, it can happen that the sign in and the reset your password, something is broken there, and people are just going and signing up with their new email. So essentially, those are not new customers and not new users. Those are just junk emails that people are adding because they are desperate to sign in.
So the product I'm building now is like a carrier operation system, right? So basically what you will do is like a shipper send a tender request to the carrier, then carrier will accept it or reject it. So currently I see the acceptance rate in my current production system like 60%, which is relatively low. So we are building this product, improve the feature to increase the percentage rate. That's my metrics. So when I define this metrics, how can I better know, say, what should be the goal? Say, I should improve to 70%, 80%, or 90%. How can I say this goal is a realistic goal for me?
And
so how do you define that?
And this is actually very challenging in terms of identity because it's very hard to improve on the metrics. The adoption rate is something that you don't know what will happen there. And so you can look into the industry if you can find the number. You can set expectation with your business on what they are like expecting. You have to put something that you have to put a number, right? You can't go without putting the number. But even if you put a low number because you don't have a clue, that's also something to.
Right, because I look at the industry normally they don't measure that detail level. They also say for the carriers, normally in our industry the average capacity utilization is 80%. Some competitor can do like 90%. But regarding this specific like parameter to contribute to this capacity utilization rate.
So you have a threshold. Now you only need to decide like where the business wants to be, whether they want to be in the 90s or the 80s, I guess. Like.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to pass this one very quick because I know how annoying it is to look at this. Again, going back to 2016, I remember a VP of customer experience at Citibank came one day and said, you have to start working on this flow where if you do 30 transactions to your own account, you see a terrible experience where something like the message is bad and like the screen almost freezes and that's terrible. And I'm like, okay, and that's the first, you do whatever the VP would tell you, but then you think about it and like 98+% of the users would not get there because they're not doing this on their daily basis. And so product managers prioritize all the time. And when they do the 80%, I need to make sure that I'm doing the 80% for the 100% users and not for the 100% fraudsters. So it's okay if the message is not, welcome fraudster to the company, thank you for attacking us and come back later on. Like, so you have to be realistic on whether the usage is really something that the legitimate user is doing or the fraudster. Theme number 8, users do care about security. From time to time, I hear like very weird suggestions. Can we just save the password on default in the browser of the customer and that way they will always be signed in? Can we unmask the password on default, so that they always see what they're doing if they do a typo. And I also have things like if their password is 7 characters and they only had the typo of 1 character, can we just let them sign in? So I hear people are very creative because they totally get the pain of signing in. The problem is that custom users don't appreciate when you lower the security. And so those things of unmask and those things, users don't like being compromised on their security. These days, there is a lot of attention to those things. Take a look at this example. When I logged into Facebook, so I logged in from another device which is not known. And then when I click on sign in on the app from my mobile device, which I use on a daily basis, I get this before I move to the newsfeed. I bet a few years ago, the PM for security had to argue on why is it important to have that page before moving you on to the newsfeed, which is the actual business and where the company earns the revenue from. Now, these days, it's important enough to be able to show the company, to show the user that you care and you want to know if this is you.
So let's say I'm a user, I sign in, then I use your system to do some transaction, right? So when I sign in, I put my master data in your system, right? Then I also do transaction data. So let's say one day I want to delete my account, right? First, you will remove the master data, but how will you manage the transactional data? Right? Because that also have my user.
And there's actually this CCPA, California privacy and new rules that these days is very trendy, and a lot of companies are working very hard to, especially focusing on how to delete records. And so it is a very challenging thing to do. But you have to find a way to do it. I mean, that it's a huge investment on how to delete all of your records without leaving any identifier in your
Right,
database.
especially your records not only for yourself, it's also tied to some other business objects. Like if I just remove your record, it will impact other, say, customers or business partners.
Yep. So basically, like you would do this by visibility into what other things are connected into your account.
Because like, that's also the problem that I'm facing.
That's good. User perception on what is secure. So when I worked with Citibank, we did a huge project to support all kind of passwordless authentication. And we offer 5 new authentication methods all together, show them to the customer. 3 months after, no one chooses to use the new adoption. Like the adoption rate is very, very low. And we were like pulling our hair on why people don't use the new cool authentication methods. We really worked very, very hard on them. And what we realized with interviews and focus group was that people just have a different perception on what is secure. So we offer them the new authentication method, but they think it's not secure, so they are not using it. Or they think that they just don't want to use it for other reasons, but like we give them Touch ID to do a transaction, but they think it's not secure enough. They want the password because they think it's more secure. We realize that people prefer to do transactions in their browser, in the computer at home, rather than doing it in the mobile because they are afraid from the mobile. And so, ironically enough, we have more sensors and data intelligence to know if it's a fraudulent activity coming from the mobile rather than on the web. But still, people prefer doing things on their computer at home. And that's where like you have to invest a lot in the education when you launch a new security feature if they would really understand and believe in that. And otherwise, you also have to figure that the adoption rate would take time. And sometimes it's external factors that will change the public opinion on security. Last thing is about security as a brand. And so not all the time the features that you will launch would be passwordless, and especially the first time that you will involve the user to the new service, it would be painful in a way. And if you want to make it, if you want to explain to the user why they have to go through that extra pain, you need to make it as your brand. So the way it's just take lemons and make out of them lemonade, because that's what you do. You do a marketing campaign where you explain to the user what would be the added value of this feature. That even if they have an extra friction now, that is good for them. So you see how different companies chose to add different features and how they brand themselves. Like PayPal is saying your security is our priority. And these days you see how many companies work really, really hard to improve their reputation around security. So this is the end. Those are the 10 themes. Does anyone have questions?
If you can share, what were the other forms of authentication that you presented to the users and that they shut down?
Back then or now?
When you were suggesting these, like they prefer passwords, right? And you mentioned one was a biometric one. What were the other options?
So it was face recognition. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of things around geofencing their location. And then there was about using their phone for push notification.
Thanks.
And I can share because it's already out. So
yeah, I was kind of to ask about.
Yeah.
How is it to be an identity PM at Walmart Labs? We've heard a lot of PMs, a different kind of PMs, but identity is not much to be, to be found. So how is it to be an identity PM in Walmart Labs?
So I think it's a unique position in the sense that there is a lot to do, and where it is today is you can see how much way to go there is there compared to other companies that already adopted advanced technologies like Google or stuff like that. So they're already in that after two-factor in the very on top of the graph that I showed. So that's where you see what's the potential that there is there. And also Walmart has that huge scale, which makes it very, very challenging because like everything you do is going to millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the challenge transfer from B2B product manager to a B2C product manager? For example, I'm building B2B product now. Like, for example, I don't do a lot of A/B testing. It's more about use cases for the enterprise. Don't need to change different screens and see what screen is better for the users. And also, like, the sales cycle is also different. I mean, for B2B products, more working with the sales pipeline with our solution consultant instead of the customer facing piece. So could you also just
yes. So when I worked on solutions that were for institutional client group, which are like big corporates, there were no A/B tests. Everything was a contract that they signed before, and you know who is going to get the first beta or alpha of the product. It is challenging in a different way because you feel like every time you launch it for one customer, you get feedback, and then you realize that you go to another customer, which is another corporate, and they have their own use cases and different. So it's it's very, very challenging. While in when you go to B2C, that's where you don't go to the customer and ask him how do you feel about it. You more rely on the metrics.
Yes.
So.
Thank you.
So, just as you mentioned about the California privacy law, there is GDPR. So, how easy or how difficult is it to adapt to these regulations that come in, like from different areas and around different locations, right? How does the product adapt to it?
It's really, really challenging. When I worked at Citibank, it was all over the place. It was global consumer banking. It wasn't only on US. So the regulation comes every other day. And the priorities is changing based on like where you're going to get the higher fine. But these days, I feel like it's just another constraint that you need to bake into your spec or your requirements. So I don't treat it as like something that I'm working like adhering to this. I just need to make sure that it is supported and part of your spec.
So I think on your daily work, you work a lot with the legal team, right? Because if you're doing this identity authentication with the Europe, like this GDPR, like a lot of regulations in Europe.
Yeah, so specifically I'm focusing on US market, so I'm not taking into account now the GDPR regulation. But there are principles that you can just adhere to in terms of like privacy and make sure that your product support. So within time you get used to whether to mask or not to mask the number or what can you show and what you just have that experience so that you know what would go what would fly with legal team and privacy and what would not.
So, how do you assess like the potential for future threats? So, for example, we're at a critical juncture like in AI and quantum computing, and with quantum computing, like it's really like so much gazillion times processing power.
Yep.
Where any kind of security algorithm can potentially, actually, definitely be cracked.
Yes.
And like, how do you plan for that, and how do you implement it into your product?
I have to say that I'm trying to deal with like the known threats, and I'm keeping an eye on that. But I tend just to focus on the here and now because otherwise you would just not launch anything. Like if you're always afraid from what will come tomorrow, then you just wouldn't launch.
If policy is broken, your Walmart, Google, any account that's not your bank account it doesn't really matter. Like if policy is broken, the situation is so bad that there's no point in protecting any account because your money is not there anymore.
But I have to say that back then, Citibank did put a lot of money to invest in companies that try to protect against this quantum computing and data breach that are a result of this. So it is something to keep an eye, to find a way to protect against. But on your features, it is just nice for now.
Thanks.
What guidelines does a UX designer or product designer still follow in respect to security, that there shouldn't be too much screens or it can be easily faked? So what guidelines does a UX researcher follow?
That's a really good question. I know usually UX designers are being guided to have less screens, less clicks, adds less friction. The problem with identity is that if you combine all of those functions that you can do into one sign-in page where you can create an account, forget your password, sign in, choose a way, like all of those things into one screen. The user gets confused on where he is and what he wants to do, and whether I have an account, I don't have an account, do I remember my password, do I don't, like is there another way to sign in now? So I think these days what you see is like you see more adding more screens into the identity flow. Most of the companies chose to split between username and password as the foundation to show new sign-in methods, because you first give the username, then we will decide what authentication method we will offer you. So you see that more and more screens in the identity flow, which is supposed to help you adopt new authentication methods or get less confused on what you want to do.
What's the reason you're calling it identity and not security?
So if you call it security, and I was before, when I was at Citibank, it was part of security. Today I'm under the customer experience group, and I feel like when you put it under security, you are considered to be focused only on the information security side of it, and identity, you forget about the user, essentially. When you call it identity, that means that you take into account the user experience and the security, and it puts it in the right way.
Cool.